going to have to help us up when you get
I will. I'm very strong.
There you go.
James, nice to see you. Hello. Good. Oh, we can have one with just me and you. Ready? Yes, thank you.
Okay, let's get started. Everybody here okay?
Yes.
All right.
And you can sit up front. Right here. Take a chair then.
You know, we had a reporter out here from New York City caused a bit of a kerfluffle. Said, well, I was only flat. And there's nothing there, and they don't have any soy milk.
What?
I once took a bit of umbrage to that. Well, guess what? It works both ways. People think somebody who comes from New York, that's just New York City. But guess what? It isn't. It's Centerville. It's Monticello. It's Watkins Glen. It's rural Iowa, just like here. So when you're the United States Senator from New York, you represent both. And you know what? People in both places, they want their kids to have a safe place to grow up. And they want their water to be clean. They want the same things. And so that's why we're fortunate to have with us today a lady who tells us why she should be the next President of the United States, Kirsten Gillibrand.
Thank you so much. Thank you for bringing us all together. I'm so excited that you guys are here, and what a beautiful day. I did order the weather. I'm glad it showed up. It was important for me to show Henry how beautiful Iowa is. Henry's got to first chance on the campaign trail in Iowa. He's 11. His big brother still has a week left of school, so we'll be getting him at the next trip to Iowa. I know, but I took him out a day early. And my husband, I think, is here, although I think he went across the street. There's a 40% off sale at the men's store across the street. And I saw him picking out a new belt, so we'll see if he buys that. So I'd love to tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'll tell you about why I'm running for president, and then I'll tell you why I'm going to win. Okay, so I got my start, as you said, in upstate New York. I formed my love of politics from my grandmother. She was a woman who never went to college, born of very modest means, but knew as a secretary in our state legislature since the time she was 20 that her voice was important. But back then, very few women were elected. It was mostly men, and the women were support staff. So she figured out that if she wanted to be heard in local politics, the best way was to organize. So she asked every woman in the legislature to join her. She asked all the women in Albany to join her, and they formed the Women's Democratic Club. Now those women worked for 50 years, 2 generations, working on campaigns, organizing campaigns, electing people who shared their values. And she gave that to me. That was what she passed down to me, this unbelievable dedication that our voices matter, and that what we do with our time matters, and that grassroots activism mattered. And the interesting thing about my grandma, you know, they didn't hand her any power. She had to earn it over time. And in fact, within 50 years, my grandmother became pretty powerful. You couldn't get elected in Albany without the blessing of my grandmother and her lady friends, because those were the women who did all the work. So I remember going to lots of campaign headquarters, typically on hot August days, stuffing envelopes with a bunch of ladies. And it just left me with this impression that our democracy really does matter. And I've really never felt more concerned about the future of our democracy until now. I think what President Trump has done to create so much division, so much hatred, not only dividing us on every racial line, religious line, socioeconomic line you can find, but really separating us, making us fearful of our neighbors, fearful of people who don't look like us, fearful of people who have different religions. And he's creating enormous breach, just this tearing apart of our social fabric and our soul as a people. And I think it's a moment when all of us have to recognize, what are we going to do to make sure our voices are heard? What are we going to do to fight back? What are we going to do to make a difference? What are we going to do to reclaim this democracy? I had another role model in my mother. My mother was one of the first ladies in her community to go to law school. She was only one of three women in her class. But my mother was also brave and very, very tough. By the time she was my age, she was a second-degree black belt in karate. My mother was a woman who loved to cook, to bake. She was a great pie maker. She used to make our clothes when we were little. My mother, of course, cooked the Thanksgiving turkey every year. But unlike other moms, she also shot the Thanksgiving turkey every year. So my mom was a bit different, but she was a role model, one who dared me to be different, one who dared me to be strong, to do the things others wouldn't, to take the risks that others wouldn't. And that's who I am and who I am in public life. I always wanted to do public service because of my grandmother. I always wanted to lead others. In fact, when I was Henry's age, I remember sitting in a circle with my sister and my cousin and myself, and we were talking about what do we want to be when we grow up. And my sister said, I want to be an actress. She became an actor. Off Broadway. My cousin said she wanted to be a flight attendant. She did not become a flight attendant. I said I wanted to be a senator. Now, I didn't know what a senator was, but I knew it was a person who would make decisions, help people, and do brave things. So, this is something I always wanted to do. I started out my career in New York City as a lawyer in a big law firm. And I did not get involved in politics till later. It was when Hillary Clinton went to China that actually woke me up, that actually got me off the sidelines. I remember as a young lawyer watching her go to Beijing. She gave that big speech, women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights once and for all. And I remember kicking myself because I was upset that I wasn't invited. And I realized I wasn't invited because I wasn't involved in politics. Now, I wanted to be there because I was actually an Asian studies major. I learned how to speak Mandarin from dorms in Beijing. And I thought for our First Lady to be that brave, that bold, to give that message at that time, at that place, was extraordinary. And I wanted to be part of that. And so over the next 10 years, I got involved in politics. I organized campaigns. I helped raise money. I worked getting senators elected and governors elected and presidents elected. And the more I got involved, the more I wanted to serve too. And I finally got up enough courage to run for Congress. And I called a friend who was a pollster before I got in, just to say, you know, I want to run in New York 20, can I win? And he said no. I said, really, Jeffrey? I'm really good at raising money. I'm going to raise $2 million for this congressional campaign. I'm going to get my message out. He said, Kirsten, I'm sorry. It's 2-1 Republican. You can't win. I said, well, you know, what happens if I run the perfect campaign? I could win then, right? He said, nope. There are more cows than Democrats in your district. You actually cannot win. And I said, well, what happens if this guy gets indicted? I could clearly win then, right? And he said, well, it depends what he gets indicted for. So you can imagine, red, red, red. The only person who thought I could win was my mother. And that tells you a lot about my mother. And so we did run. I didn't make a lot of mistakes. I did raise the $2 million. Miracles do happen, and I did win. Now, my opponent, the one mistake he made is he never took me seriously. He looked at me and he said, she's just another pretty face. And I, of course, said thank you, as all upstate young ladies would say, but then talked about what I was for and why I thought our troops needed to get out of Iraq and why we needed health care as a right and not a privilege, running on very progressive causes. And we got the vote out. I learned how to organize. By election day, we were knocking on 20,000 doors every weekend. Just put that in your head. For a 600,000 sleepy district in upstate New York, we were making 10,000 phone calls. That's a campaign. That is a grassroots campaign. I ran for re-election and I won again. The second time, I won by 24 points. So imagine in a 2-1 redistrict making that kind of landslide. Well, it got the notice of my governor, so when Hillary Clinton became senator and she was elevated, he looked at me. And he said, not only do you understand the economy and what's happening with the global collapse here in the United States, but you are somebody who can actually represent upstate New York and these places that are rural, that are red, that are purple. And so I was appointed. I ran for election 3 times in 10, 12, and 14. 10, 12, and 18. In my 3 elections, I have the highest vote total in the history of state at 72%. That's higher than President Obama, higher than Hillary Clinton, higher than any person who's ever run for Senate or governor in the history of the state. And so I've also won legislatively. I get stuff done in Washington. As a freshman senator, I carried the bill, the first gay rights piece of legislation with Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal. And I went to my colleagues, 2 Republicans, and said, listen, why would you discriminate against someone who's willing to die for this country based on who they love? Even Democrats looked at me in the eye and said, why are you doing this now, Kirsten? It's not convenient. And I looked them straight in the eye and I said, when is civil rights ever convenient? You do it because it's the right thing to do. And so we repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell with 7 Republican votes and all Democrats. I then turned around and represented our 9/11 first responders, men and women who raced up towers when everyone else came down. They were told the air was clean by the EPA under George Bush. So they worked on ground zero, first looking for survivors, then finding remains for weeks and months and started to die of horrible cancers. And so I brought those first responders to Washington. We knocked on every Senate door. We had advocates helping us. Jon Stewart spent 2 whole episodes on it. MSNBC, CNN, all talking about first responders. But I knew if I wanted to pass this bill, I needed to go into the lion's den. So I went into Fox News. And I met with Roger Ailes. And I said to Roger, Roger, you say your party's the party of first responders, but you're standing here doing nothing when these men and women are dying of horrible diseases. And I convinced him to support the 9/11 health bill. And we learned something that's true in politics. When you have Jon Stewart on one side and Fox News on the other, you're going to win. And so when we finally passed the bill, we passed it unanimously. So I know how to get things done, even in the last Congress. With a Republican House, Senate, and President, I passed 18 bills in the last Congress. Common sense stuff, stuff that helps rural America. Money for rural broadband. Money for baby boomers who want to sell their businesses to their employees so we can have more employee ownership. Money for made in America manufacturing. So I get things done. But more than anything else, I think what this president has done is really changed the character of the country. He's someone who demonizes the vulnerable. He's someone who demonizes and demeans the weak. He's actually a president who punches down. And he does all this because he wants you to believe he's strong, but he's not. Our president is a coward. And I think this country deserves a president who's brave, deserves a president who will do the right thing for the right reasons, who will go up against any special interest, any powerful interest to do what's right, who will go through fire to do what's right. And that is who I am. I've taken on the Pentagon twice. First over Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal. Now over sexual violence in the military. I've taken on the banks as a congresswoman from New York. When Democrats and Republicans threw billions at the banks to bail them out, I read the bill. It was going to leave the taxpayer holding the bag. So I voted against the banks twice. I've taken on Congress. As a freshman member of Congress, I posted my earmarks, my schedule, my financial disclosure online, followed it up with my taxes. First member of Congress to ever do those things. First presidential candidate this cycle to post all taxes from the 12 years I've been in public service. Radical transparency. Took on the culture of corruption. Recognized that members of Congress were making money off inside information. And I found out it wasn't even against the law. So I passed a bill to make sure insider trading by members of Congress is illegal. So there is not a special interest. There is not a powerful interest. There is not anyone or anything in this country that I will not stand up to for the right reason. I will go through fire to do what's right. And I've done it every year since I've been in public service. I believe we deserve a president who's brave. I am that person. I will represent this country. I will reach into the red places, the purple places, and the blue places. I will bring people together. I will heal the divide that President Trump has created, and I will get things done on behalf of the American people. That is why I'm running for president, and it is why I'm going to win.
All right, Pam, speak up.
Please tell us about your agriculture policies and renewable fuels, especially in trade.
Yep. So I've sat on the Agriculture Committee for 12 years in the House and the Senate. And I believe that agriculture in America is a national security issue. I want to make sure that we support our farmers so that we can always produce our food here. And for a lot of farmers, that's gotten harder and harder every generation because unfortunately, the way the law is, it is encouraging consolidation, it is encouraging outsourcing, and that is not where we want to end up. So I believe in supporting our small farms, our small producers, and I've become an expert in dairy farming specifically because that's so important to upstate New York, and I'll just tell you about how that works. Our dairy farms are going out of business. They are consolidating because they can't compete. They don't actually get paid the price for the milk they produce that actually represents the cost of production. The price of dairy goes up and down and doesn't reflect the inputs, doesn't reflect the cost of feed, the cost of production, the cost of energy. And it is set by people in Chicago based on the price of cheese. So there's so much dysfunction in ag policy. And so we really need to look holistically at ag to how to make sure we keep ag production here and we make sure that small farms can survive. In upstate New York, we have dairy farmers who are committing suicide. The suicide rate among farmers is something you can't even imagine. So that's wrong, and we've got to fix it. And I've worked on policies to make sure that we can actually reimburse farmers when they don't get paid for cost of production, trying to change the insurance that's available, taking on the insurance industry that doesn't meet the needs of a lot of our farmers, and more access to capital. One of the biggest challenges for a dairy farm or any farmer is access to low-cost capital. And so increasing the money we spend in USDA under programs like EQIP that allows them to be conservationists, that allow them to ensure clean air, clean water from their farming practices, to make sure they have the resources they need to have value-added production. If you're an apple farmer, to get an apple slicer so you can give sliced apples to the local school or to the local hospital. That's the kind of investment we want to make in our farmers. In terms of clean air and clean water, I think it's fundamental to tackling global climate change. I think global climate change is the greatest threat to humanity that exists today, and I believe that we need a bold solution to meet the urgency of the crisis. What that means to me is passing a Green New Deal, which is ideas that are already bipartisan. It's infrastructure, investing in roads, bridges, sewers, high-speed rail, rural broadband, a new electric grid. It's green jobs, investing our kids in STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and math, helping them get the training to have opportunities in wind, solar, geothermal, hydropower, and biofuels. And then clean air and clean water. Just really make the investments so that our farmers here in Iowa would have the resources they need to make sure nitrates don't flow into our water system. In places like New York or Michigan or places like New Hampshire, we've got legacy manufacturing that has PFOA and PFAS and all these chemicals in the water that are going to poison our children and our families. So make resources available. I will pass a Green New Deal. The only part that's new is the goal, net zero carbon emissions. But I'm not afraid of a big goal. In the same way John F. Kennedy said, I want to put a man on the moon in 10 years. He had no idea if he could get a man on the moon in 10 years, but he knew it was a great organizing principle. He knew it was a way to galvanize our researchers, our scientists, our engineers, a way to make every kid in America want to be an astronaut. So why not create, not a space race with Russia, but how about a green energy race with China? Why not create a worldwide global competition about who's the one who's going to invent their way into a solution? And you can do that as president. You can make it a cornerstone of your presidency, restore our leadership on the world stage, and galvanize worldwide competition to actually meet the challenge.
Jesus.
Oh, thank you.
No problem.
Well, I'm the only Hispanic here. That's why I have this question. What is your position in immigration, both illegals already in this country and illegals coming through Mexico from all over the world? What you will do about this case?
So I would do two things on immigration. The first thing I would do is find bipartisan support, which we have had, on comprehensive immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship. Now, a comprehensive immigration reform bill like the one we passed in the Senate is a 10-year path to citizenship where you actually pay your taxes during that 10 years, and you pay your Social Security, and you pay your local property taxes, investing in our school and our infrastructure. And if you do everything right for 10 years, then you have the ability to earn your citizenship. That will transform the economy overnight. If you have 11 million people who can come out from the shadows, start paying their taxes, start paying into Social Security to earn that citizenship, you will create huge economic growth and opportunity, and you will raise wages for everyone. So that's one change. The second change is I would stop doing what President Trump is doing at our border. I would not be separating parents from their children at our border. I would not be locking them up in for-profit prisons. And I would also focus on national security. There's no reason why we can't fund border security. There's no reason why we can't stop the cross-border human trafficking, gun trafficking, drug trafficking. We should invest in that, fund that, but stop spending the money on the for-profit prisons. They're not needed. We could assign lawyers to asylum seekers, we could have real immigration judges, and we could have a real process that's run under the Department of Justice, not Homeland Security.
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
So, okay, I'm Christine Carpenter from the Cedar Valley Cancer Committee Beyond Pain team, and we're a member organization of the National Breast Cancer Coalition. And I wanted to thank you for signing our public policy platform through the National Breast Cancer Coalition, because it looks at transparent research and making sure it's accountable, guaranteed access to quality, evidence-based, patient-centered healthcare for all, and then influence, making sure that trained advocates are at the table when all healthcare and research and policy decisions are made. And you signed it in New Hampshire with my colleague in New Hampshire. And so I just wanted to say thank you very much for supporting ending breast cancer.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being an advocate. So much of our democracy works best when regular people stand up and demand it. And so the fact that you're here to make the point so that everybody knows how important translational research is to end breast cancer and to make sure that we fund it. We fund some of it through the military. I've been on the Armed Services Committee for the last 10 years, and it makes a difference because we have research there, and we can have research through the NIH, and we can have research being done at our teaching universities and teaching hospitals across the country. And so investing in research, something President Trump does not do, is so short-sighted. Thank you. You're welcome.
Okay, go right ahead.
Thank you. My name is Tammy Hott, and I was diagnosed with HIV on August 23rd, 1993, at a time where life expectancies weren't that high. So the last 5 years, I've been calling things reclaiming milestones that I never thought I'd live to see. My son was born December 21st, 1996, 2 months and 9 days after his dad died of AIDS. So the first 13 years of his life, I was living to die, just waiting to get sick. But I've been lucky. I've had access to life-saving medications and treatment the entire time I've been diagnosed. So the ACA has changed my life and is critical for me to continue to reclaim milestones like in 2015, seeing my son walk across the stage to receive his diploma. At September 1st of 2018, he escorted me down the aisle for his wedding, and now I have 2 grandsons, and my Henry is 4 months old. So, thank you. What is your plan for the Affordable Care Act and to ensure that health care is a right and not a privilege?
Yes, well, you are very brave, and thank you for being a role model for all of us. That took a lot of courage, and you're clearly a role model for your family and for your grandchildren, which is amazing. So thank you for being so brave and strong and courageous. So I believe that healthcare should be a right and not a privilege, which I think everyone here believes. And I think the quickest way to get there is let people buy into Medicare. A Medicare for All solution is the quickest way to create competition with the insurance industry, to drive down costs quickly, and to get us to single payer. So when Senator Sanders introduced his bill, the part that I got to work on was the transition, the 4-year transition period. And the way I imagine it is this: let any American buy into Medicare at 4% of income, have it be matched by their employer. It will create immediate competition with the insurance industry, who will not probably choose to compete because they care more about profits than people every time. And so if you order that low cost, most Americans, 90-something% of Americans earn less than $100,000. So 4% of $100,000 is $4,000 a year. Do some math in your head. Is that more or less than you're paying today? I bet most people it is less. And so the truth is we will outcompete the insurance industry, and we will drive people into an excellent healthcare system that is both quality and affordable. Let's say 90% of Americans buy in or 4 or 5 years. Your step to get to single payer is so small, and the best way to do that is make Medicare an earned benefit just like Social Security, where everyone buys in across their lifetime, whether working part-time, full-time, big companies, small companies. I would make CHIP universal, that every child is registered for CHIP, which is the Children's Health Insurance, immediately, have it be covered under Medicare and Medicaid so that it is fully paid for, so every kid up until the age of 26 is covered. That would make a difference. And so I really believe that if we move to single payer over the next 5 years, we will have less expensive medicine, we'll be able to get more preventive care, we'll be able to change outcomes, and we will be able to bend the cost curve. I would do 2 changes to Medicare. First, I'd make sure that reimbursement rates actually reflect cost, which they don't today. And 2, I would take on the drug companies. If the drug companies will not produce a generic in a timely manner, I would ask the NIH to do it and compete with the drug companies to make sure we have low-cost drugs no matter what, and I'd make sure Medicare gets the lowest cost just like Canada does.
I just would like to know what your stand is on gun control.
Yes. So I believe that gun crime in this country is a scourge. And it is largely caused by the lack of concern by the NRA and by the gun manufacturers. They want to sell guns at all costs, and they want to oppose any member of Congress who is for common sense gun reform. And it doesn't matter how common sense it is, the NRA is going to oppose it because they want to sell more guns. So they oppose the Violence Against Women's Act because they want to make sure abusers can buy weapons when they want. They oppose universal background checks because they want people on the terror watch list to be able to buy weapons. They want people who are grave mental illness and violent backgrounds to buy weapons. They want people who have criminal convictions for violent crimes to buy weapons. They don't care. And so we got to go after the NRA. We got to go after the gun manufacturers. And if you do that, you can then find enough bipartisan support to take on universal background checks. Ban the bump stocks in large magazines and assault rifles. And then have a federal anti-gun trafficking law, because a lot of cities like Chicago or New York, the guns are just trafficked straight into the hands of criminals. So those are 3 priorities which are already all bipartisan, so I will bring Congress together to pass them. But the way to take on the NRA, which is really fundamental to this presidency, is you have to have publicly funded elections. You've got to get money out of politics. Because money in politics is the root of the corruption.
Yeah, do I have a right to defend myself, my family, my house with a gun? People that break into my house, they have guns.
Sure.
Do I have a right to kill them?
Not necessarily. If they're just knocking on the door because they broke down and need help with their car, no, you don't have a right to kill them.
If they broke into my house and they have guns.
Yes, that's right to defense. Right to self-defense exists in our laws, in our state laws, in our federal laws. It always exists.
Yeah. Now, last summer, Molly Tibbetts was raped and stabbed to death down here in Iowa. If she would have had a gun, I think she would be alive. She was a University of Iowa student.
So I don't think arming students and arming teachers is smart. I just don't. And it would be better if the people who did have access to weapons are responsible, law-abiding gun owners. But right now, because of the NRA, that's not the case. Criminals can get such easy access to weapons. In New York State, just let me tell you my history. In New York State, 90% of the weapons used in crime come from out of state. Most of them are illegal. Most of them get sold out of the back of a truck directly into the hand of a gang member. Why the NRA has to oppose that is beyond me. Like, we need a federal anti-trafficking law enforcement. Do you believe in law enforcement? Do you believe in our law enforcement being able to have a voice Well, they ask, they beg, please have a federal anti-trafficking law. And you know who stands in the way? The NRA. Because they do not care about anyone except gun sales. It's the definition of greed. And so I think they lie to you. I think they lie to the American people. They lie to people across this country that somehow a politician like me wants to take away gun rights. I don't. I don't want criminals to have them. I don't want people who are gravely mentally ill. I don't want a young man who's had mental illness his whole life to be able to walk in and buy an assault rifle, an assault rifle at a store because it's available to anybody. It's not okay. So we need to have common sense. And there's nothing wrong with the Second Amendment. We can enforce the Second Amendment. We can protect the Second Amendment. What's wrong is greed and corruption that's at the heart of Washington. And members of Congress who don't have the guts to stand up to that.
Okay, we got time for one more question, and I promise this lady here.
She'll be around for pictures afterwards.
Thank you. My name is Max, and I'm an ACLU Rights for All voter.
Thank you, ACLU rights voter.
And as you know, our immigration system locks up hundreds of thousands of immigrants at a huge taxpayer cost every year, including mothers and children escaping violence.
Yeah.
If elected, would you commit to decreasing detention by 75% or more by the end of your first term?
Well, I'm not going to spend any federal money on for-profit prisons, period. So, and one of the questions that I addressed a little earlier is what's actually happening at the border. I visited these places. They are horrible. So I brought little Henry with me. I went to a facility that is run by HHS. It's in an abandoned Walmart. They lock up kids, boys, aged 10 to 17. And I talked to the boys. I wasn't allowed to talk to them, but I snuck a few conversations. And I said, what's your favorite time? And the little boy said, outside time. And I said, how much time do you get outside? And he said, 2 hours a day. That is run like a prison. Every boy had to wear the exact same clothes. They had to walk in straight lines. They aren't allowed to hug each other, even if they're brothers, not console each other, even if they're in tears. It doesn't matter. We treat them in an inhumane way. The other facility I went to was run by GEO, a for-profit prison system that had mothers and children. And they showed me these beautiful facilities and saying, here's the payphones. They can call lawyers anytime they want. I was like, well, what happens if they don't have money? They're like, oh, they can work. I was like, really? Work where? They can do custodial work here. I was like, well, how much do you pay them? $2 a day. Sounds like a prison to me. So I won't fund that. I think you can have community-based a processing system within the community where when a family who goes to a border entry point asks for asylum, they are given a lawyer, they are processed in the community, given a court date, and allowed to be part of the community. We do not need to lock them up. We didn't do it this way forever. This is something that is new, and it's ineffective. So I wouldn't do the way President Trump's doing, and I would have a humane system run by judges, run by lawyers, through the Department of Justice, because it's very separate from the Homeland Security issues. The Homeland Security issues are about human traffickers, gun traffickers, drug traffickers, and that's the thing we should be funding. But under President Trump, the money that goes for that is being diverted to pay places like GEO. It's wrong.
Henry, can you stand up for a moment? Come here into the middle so everybody can see you.
Good job.
All right, wave to everybody, Henry. The point being is that elections are about the future, and the senator brought the future with her. She's going to stick around and talk to you. Thanks for coming, everybody.